I recently lived through the kind of nightmare you don't wake up from. The HOA president came barreling up the trail, screaming like a banshee, waving a rule book in one hand and a key in the other, insisting she inspect our cabin immediately. Her reasoning? If you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind letting me in. Ironically, the only thing that got unlocked that day was a federal case the second my wife handed her the warrant. But let me take you back to how it all began. The lawnmower was growling through the thick summer grass, spitting up green clippings, while I soaked in the simple joy of a Saturday well spent, sun warming my back, a cold drink waiting on the porch, and a freshly cut lawn stretching like a welcome mat into peace. Inside, my wife Sarah was likely curled up with a book, windows open, catching the breeze. We'd moved here to escape the chaos, to embrace stillness, to buy a slice of quiet that we thought would be priceless. But as I was learning, that kind of quiet comes with a cost. The roar of the mower was suddenly eclipsed by a shrill, screeching voice slicing through the air like a siren. I looked up and saw her, Karen, stomping down the gravel path that linked our cabins, her face contorted with rage, eyes wild, posture hunched like a vulture zeroing in on its prey. Behind her waddled her husband Richard, a large doughy man, whose only job seemed to be looming silently, a sneer stretching permanently across his face. Karen, of course, did all the yelling. He was just the muscle, the heavy shadow meant to intimidate. "Turn that thing off," she shrieked, brandishing a crumpled paper like a sword. "You're in clear violation." I sighed, cut the engine, and a suffocating silence fell. Only the buzzing of insects and Karen's furious breathing filled the air. I'm not exactly the patient type. My gut reaction, hot and immediate, was to tell her exactly where she could stick her precious notice. I've spent my life building things, solving problems with pressure and grit, and when I hit resistance, my instinct is always to push harder. But I'd made a promise to Sarah that I would try, really try, to be civil. I wiped the sweat off my forehead with the back of my glove, looked her straight in the eye, and said through clenched teeth, "Karen, it's 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I'm allowed to mow my lawn," I said flatly, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. Karen's eyes narrowed into sharp little slits as she snapped back. The Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association bylaws clearly state that no excessive noise is permitted before noon on weekends. Your primitive machine is excessive. I almost laughed. Primitive? This mower was brand new, top of the line, and probably made less noise than Richard snoring through an afternoon nap. It's a normal mower, Karen. Everyone on the lake mows their lawn on Saturday mornings. But then Richard lumbered forward, chest puffed out like he was about to bench press the bylaws, and grunted, "Not anymore. The rules have been updated. Karen's the president. What she says goes." That's when the screen door creaked open and Sarah stepped onto the porch, holding her coffee like royalty, serene as ever. That's my Sarah Stillwaters, calm and deep, the perfect counterbalance to my volcanic temper. She leaned casually against the railing and took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee before saying, "Karen, good morning. That's a lovely shade of red you're wearing. It really brings out the fury in your eyes." For a moment, Karen sputtered, visibly rattled, thrown off her self-righteous momentum. "Sarah, your husband is violating the covenants. This is an official warning," she snapped, trying to regain control. But Sarah just smiled, that sharp, knowing smile of hers that never quite made it to her eyes. Is it? Because I've got the bylaws right here, the actual ones we signed when we bought this place, and it clearly says that 10 a.m. is just fine for lawn maintenance. Or did you forget to send us the updated version? She tilted her head slightly. Voice still sweet but with a blade underneath. The one you and Richard scribble on napkins whenever the mood strikes. Karen's face, already red, turned a blotchy, livid purple. She wasn't used to pushback, certainly not the kind that came armed with facts and laced with mockery. Being challenged, especially by someone so calm and composed, was unacceptable. In her world, she screeched like a banshee, "You are insolent. I'll have you fined. I'll have a lien put on this house." And that old fire roared back to life in my gut. I took a step forward, fists clenched tight, every instinct in me screaming to protect what was mine, to protect Sarah. But before I could say a word, she hit me with a look sharp, calm, commanding one that said, "Stand down." "I've got this." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. She just took another slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. "You do that, Karen," she said, voice smooth as glass, cutting through the heat like ice. "Go ahead and file your paperwork. I'm sure the county clerk will love reading the official meeting minutes where the community voted to change the weekend noise ordinance. You did hold a vote, right? With a quorum present and proper notice sent to all homeowners?" Her tone was polite, almost cheerful, but each word was a blade. "Because if you didn't, Karen ... that wouldn't just make the new bylaw invalid. Would make it fraud." For just a moment, something flickered behind Karen's eyes, fear, or maybe the realization that Sarah wasn't someone she could bulldoze. Richard, meanwhile, just looked like someone trying to do math with his fingers. Karen's face twisted as she crushed the paper in her hand and threw us a glare that could strip paint. "This isn't over," she hissed, pure venom in every syllable. "You people don't belong here. I'll make sure you see that." She spun around and stomped up the trail, with her oversized shadow, Richard, trudging behind her like a loyal dog. I stood there watching, my pulse still pounding, adrenaline still burning in my chest like wildfire, and then felt Sarah's hand gently land on my arm. "Breathe," she whispered, grounding me with just one word. I let out the breath. I hadn't realized I was holding. I wanted to tear them apart, I admitted. "I know," she said softly, squeezing my arm, "but that's what they want. They want you to lose it so they can play the victims. We're not going to give them that." I looked at her then, my calm, brilliant, unshakable wife, and realized. Once again, she was right. She was always right. But as I stared at the path where Karen and Richard had just vanished, a cold knot twisted in my gut. This wasn't some petty neighborhood spat over lawnmower noise. This was a full-blown declaration of war, and the worst part? I had this sinking feeling we'd already lost the first battle before we even knew one had begun. We weren't supposed to be fighters anymore, that life was behind us. I'd spent 15 brutal years in the tech world, clawing my way up from nothing to build a software company from scratch. Every day was a battle fighting for investors, for top talent, for survival in a market that chewed people up and spat them out. I was good at it, maybe too good, ruthless, relentless, and when necessary, strategically devious. but it hollowed me out. By the time I sold the company, I was burned to the core, my nerves frayed, my patience gone. I didn't want war anymore. I wanted quiet, real quiet, the kind that lives between pine trees and lingers over still water. Sarah's past, though, was wrapped in shadows and sharper edges. She always claimed she had a boring government job. Back in D.C., something about forms and red tape, but I knew better. There was a steel in her, a kind of practiced calm and razor-sharp perception that didn't come from filing reports. I'd seen it in the way she could size someone up in a glance, the way she picked apart situations like puzzles, the way her hands never shook, even when mine did. She was retired now too, and like me, said she was tired of conflict. That's why we chose Oakwood Preserve, a place that looked like it belonged on a postcard log in stone cabins tucked among tall trees, wrapped around a pristine lake. 2 hours from the nearest city, far from the noise and chaos we'd left behind. We paid cash for our slice of paradise, a sturdy, welcoming cabin with a wide porch and a massive stone fireplace, the kind of place you imagine growing old in. We thought we were free, no more deadlines, no more enemies, just peace. But the first sign of trouble came quiet and neat. A crisp white envelope in our mailbox, barely a week after we'd moved in. I thought it was a welcome letter. Instead, it was a violation notice. Our offense? A small, cheerful garden gnome sitting innocently beside the flower bed. According to the HOA, it was an unapproved lawn ornament. The notice came with a thin $25 fine attached, which made me laugh out loud. But Sarah just raised an eyebrow and said calmly, "Well, that's specific." So we paid the fine without complaint and quietly moved the cheerful little gnome to the back porch, out of sight, trying, in good faith, to be agreeable. We were the new people, after all, and we didn't want trouble. But just a few days later, we got our first real glimpse of the strange leadership dynamics in our new community. It started when our neighbor Stu showed up at our front door carrying a still warm apple pie and a nervous smile. He was a jittery little man with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and he talked like his mouth was trying to outrun his brain. Seemed friendly enough though. "Just wanted to welcome you folks," he said, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. "And, give you a little friendly heads up about Karen." He leaned in like he was sharing a state secret. "She's the H.O.A. president, has been for 10 years. She runs a tight ship, a very tight ship. If you get a notice, just pay it. Don't argue. It's easier. Trust me." Then came the stories, wild, ridiculous stories that sounded more like the workings of a petty dictatorship than a neighborhood association. A family fined $500 for leaving a garbage can out 2 hours past the deadline. A dad forced to tear down his kid's treehouse because the paint color wasn't an approved earth tone. We laughed nervously at the time, but it didn't take long to realize he wasn't exaggerating. Karen and her ever-present husband, Richard, cruised the neighborhood in a custom golf cart painted the most offensively dull shade of beige imaginable. They patrolled like small-town royalty, gliding slowly past homes, pointing at things, jotting notes on a clipboard like they were conducting a military operation. It was absurd and oddly unsettling. Richard was the physical embodiment of smug privilege, a large, soft man in expensive golf shirts who never said much but always managed to loom. He was Karen's silent enforcer, the muscle behind her manufactured authority. We tried our best to ignore them. We focused on the reasons we moved here in the first place: fishing together on the lake, wandering through the peaceful woods, sitting side by side on our wide porch with the breeze in our faces, pretending the ridiculous little kingdom of Oakwood Preserve didn't exist just beyond our fence line. And as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset spill gold across the lake, we clung to our peace like it was something sacred, determined to hold on to the quiet life we'd come here to build. Even with the HOA watchdogs constantly sniffing around, we weren't looking for conflict. We just wanted to be left alone. We told ourselves that if we kept our heads down, paid the ridiculous fines for minor violations like the garden gnome, and didn't stir the pot, Karen and Richard would get bored and shift their attention elsewhere. We truly believed we could coexist, that if we emotionally fenced ourselves off from the neighborhood nonsense, we could live in our own little world, untouched. That was our first mistake, naive and hopeful, because we didn't yet understand the kind of people we were dealing with. Bullies don't walk away when ignored, they escalate. For people like Karen and Richard, power isn't just something they have, it's something they need to use constantly, something they crave to reinforce their imagined superiority. Our silence wasn't seen as respect, it was seen as defiance. Our desire for privacy wasn't interpreted as dignity, it came off as arrogance. To them, we weren't just disinterested neighbors, we were a threat because we weren't afraid. And that, as we'd soon learn, was the one thing they couldn't tolerate. Far worse than an unapproved lawn ornament was the unforgivable crime of indifference. The dream we'd built here, our vision of a quiet, idyllic life, was about to crack wide open. The very fight we thought we'd left behind was already forming shadows on our doorstep. We had tried to be patient, tried to be kind, tried to accommodate, but with tyrants, accommodation is never enough. It only smells like weakness to them. And so the next battle began quietly, absurdly over a fence. I know it sounds small, trivial even, but it was never about the wood or the wire. It was about control, about who got to decide what was allowed and what wasn't. We had a dog, Buster, a lovable golden retriever who lived for running and fetching and rolling in the grass. We loved Buster, and we wanted him safe. So we decided to build a fence simple, reasonable, perfectly within our rights. And since this was an HOA community, we knew there were rules, and we weren't trying to bend or break them. Sarah, meticulous and brilliant, spent an entire afternoon poring over the HOA covenant book with a highlighter and a ruler, dissecting every clause like a lawyer preparing for a landmark Supreme Court battle. The rules, of course, were absurdly specific: black-coated chain link only, no higher than 4 feet, posts set in concrete, gate required to swing inward, and we followed them to the letter without complaint. We drafted the plans ourselves, a perfectly detailed diagram showing exact property lines, precise height, material specs, gate placement, everything in black and white. We even included the name of the licensed bonded contractor we intended to use, a contractor that notably was already listed on the HOA's own roster of pre-approved vendors. Confident we'd done everything right, we submitted the full application to the Architectural Review Committee, which, as we now understood all too well, was just a pompous title for Karen sitting alone in her living room with a rubber stamp. Still, we expected a quick routine approval, We had followed every single requirement. No loopholes, no gray areas, no room for complaint. A week passed, then another. Our contractor was ready to start, materials ordered, crew lined up, but we couldn't give the green light without that elusive approval. I finally called the HOA office, just a number that rang straight into Karen's house. She answered with syrupy condescension, her voice practically oozing smug delight. "Oh, Mr. Miller," she cooed. "Yes, we received your application. The committee is reviewing it very carefully." I could hear the grin in her voice. "What is there to review?" I asked, barely keeping my temper in check. "We followed every rule in the book. It's the same exact fence the Hendersons and the Garcias have." There was a pause, and then she spoke, slowly and deliberately, each word like a taunt. "Yes, well, the committee must consider the overall aesthetic impact on the community. We'll let you know our decision in due course." And then she hung up. In due course turned out to mean another agonizing week of silence until yet another crisp white envelope appeared in our mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper with bold letters stamped across the top. "Fence application denied. Number." Explanation: no rationale. Just a red stamp of rejection like a bureaucratic middle finger. I saw red. This wasn't oversight. It wasn't even personal preference. It was a blatant, calculated abuse of power. And we knew it. It was pure abuse of power, no logic, no fairness. Just a flat-out no, because she could. Because it was us, and that made me snap. I stomped into the kitchen, fuming, where Sarah sat calmly reading, and slammed the letter down on the table. "Look at this." "Just look at it," I growled. She picked it up, read it carefully, her expression unreadable, then placed it back down like it was nothing more than a napkin. "Okay," she said softly. That single word nearly set me off. "Okay, it's not okay, Sarah. This is a declaration of war. She's doing this just to mess with us." Sarah met my fury with steady calm. "I know," she said. "So, what are you going to do?" I knew she was testing me, looking for the version of me that didn't blow up at every provocation. The version that could fight smart instead of loud. My first instinct was to storm over to Karen's house, rip that smug smile off her face, and demand an explanation, but I stopped. I took a breath, then another. "I'm going to appeal," I said through clenched teeth. "I'm going to go to the next board meeting and present our case in front of everyone. I'll bring our plans, photos of the other fences. They won't let her get away with this in public." Sarah nodded slowly, approvingly. "Good. That's a good plan. But we never got the chance." The very next day, another envelope landed. In our mailbox, thicker this time. Inside was a formal letter, dripping with legalese and self-importance. Not only was our fence application denied permanently, but we were now being fined $1,000. The reason? Submitting an application in bad faith with the alleged intent to disrupt the community's aesthetic harmony. It was complete, fabricated garbage nonsense pulled out of thin air with zero basis in anything remotely real. Karen had just invented a $1,000 punishment on a whim, as if she were queen of her own petty kingdom. And while the money didn't matter, we could afford it. It was the principle. It was the malice. The unfiltered, deliberate cruelty of it all that made our blood boil. She wasn't just blocking our fence, she was punishing us for daring to ask, for challenging her made-up authority, and that was it. That was the breaking point. The final crack that shattered the last of my let's be good neighbors mindset. I looked at Sarah, ready to unleash another rant, but for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw that same fire in her eyes. The one I'd been carrying alone, only now it burned just as hot. The cool, calm lake that was my wife had turned into a stormy, roiling sea. She picked up the $1,000 fine notice, read it slowly, didn't say a single word. Then, with absolute precision, she folded the paper in half, walked over to the trash can, and dropped it in like it was nothing more than lint. When she turned back to me, her face was carved from stone calm, cold, and lethal. It was a look I'd only seen a couple of times before, and every time, it meant the same thing. Someone was about to regret pushing her. "All right," she said quietly, her voice like distant thunder. "No more Mrs. Nice Wife." She marched into our home office, grabbed a fresh legal pad and a pen, and sat down at the desk like a general planning a war campaign. "Let's go to war." And as I watched her begin writing out a list, slow and deliberate, I felt a cold, sharp thrill cut through my rage because the fight was officially on. Karen had wanted a reaction, had worked hard to provoke us, to push and prod and bait us into fury. Well, she'd done it. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was what happened when she made both of us angry, together. Our quiet life may have been over, but a new mission had taken its place. We weren't just going to fight back. We were going to reclaim our peace, even if it meant dismantling her entire little empire to do it. The first phase of our war wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be fought in the shadows, with paper and whispers. My instinct was to go scorched earth, to hire a lawyer, file a lawsuit, call the news, make a massive public stink and burn everything down in one glorious blast. But Sarah, ever the tactician, tapped her pen on the pad and shook her head. "No," she said, "that's exactly what she expects. A lawsuit is slow. It's expensive. And it lets her play the victim. Look at the rich outsiders trying to sue our little community. No, we'll do this smart. We can't fight her on her terms, we fight her on ours," Sarah said, her voice calm but steely. And what followed was a masterclass in quiet rebellion, a plan so patient and calculated it made my first instinct to go nuclear look laughably reckless. Phase 1. Intelligence gathering. If we were going to win, we needed to know everything, every rule, every loophole, every crack in the foundation of her little empire. For the next week, we lived in the fine print. We dissected the HOA bylaws, the covenants, the county property records. I handled the digital front, combing through the county clerk's online portal for deeds, liens, permits, anything that looked off. Sarah took charge of the human front. Every evening she walked the neighborhood with Buster, our lovable golden retriever, trotting by her side. He was the perfect icebreaker. People stopped to pet him, and Sarah, all warm smiles and genuine charm, struck up easy, meandering conversations not about Karen, not directly. She asked about the neighborhood, where to get the best corn, how long folks had lived here, and in return, people talked. Oh, did they talk? That's how we started to piece together the truth behind Stu's warnings. The horror stories weren't isolated, they were everywhere. Fines for trash cans left out for minutes too long, homeowners forced to repaint their front doors over unapproved hues, a sense of constant surveillance that wrapped the whole neighborhood in a quiet chokehold. And Karen? She'd been president for 10 years, ever since Richard engineered a mass resignation of the previous board. From there, she consolidated power like a seasoned dictator, dissolving every committee architecture, landscaping, welcome folding them all under her own authority. The entire HOA was essentially a one-woman operation. And her strongest weapon? Fear. People were afraid to challenge her because the moment they did, violations would mysteriously appear, vague and devastating, like punishment from a petty god. We met with Stu again over coffee, and he looked like a man meeting his handlers in a Cold War thriller, eyes darting, hands trembling as he stirred his cup until coffee sloshed onto the table. "You're really going to fight her?" he whispered, disbelief and dread bleeding into every word. "No one's ever really fought her before." Sarah smiled gently, wrapping both hands around her mug. "We're not fighting," she said. "We're just trying to understand the rules." Stu gave a shaky, humorless laugh. "The rules?" he said. "The rules are whatever Karen decides they are that day, and you better be careful. She's got eyes and ears everywhere." Stu leaned in and told us about the HOA's finances, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was afraid the walls might be listening. He explained how the monthly dues had nearly doubled over the past 5 years, yet everything in the neighborhood was steadily falling apart. The community boat dock was rotting, potholes on the private roads were widening, and basic services were either delayed or completely neglected. "Where's all the money going?" I asked, baffled. Stu just shrugged helplessly, eyes wide with fear. "No one knows," he said. "She presents a budget once a year at the meeting, but it's just a bunch of numbers printed on paper. No receipts, no itemized details. If anyone asks for clarification, she accuses them of undermining community unity." While we were busy peeling back the layers of her power, Karen and Richard doubled down on their harassment campaign. Nothing overtly criminal, just cruel, calculated pettiness designed to grind us down. One morning, we found our rosebush, award-winning, painstakingly cared for, chopped to bits. Another day, a dead squirrel appeared on our porch like a twisted calling card. Our newspaper went missing regularly, and I could swear I heard the low whine of their golf cart more often near our driveway. It was the behavior of schoolyard bullies, trying to make life so miserable we'd pack up and disappear. But every petty act just fueled my resolve. I took photos of the vandalized roses. I emailed the sheriff's department about the squirrel, even though I knew they couldn't act on it. I started building a case file, thick with documentation, time-stamped images, logs of every encounter, every strange noise at night, every anonymous note. But the worst part wasn't the damage, it was the feeling of constantly being watched. I'd step outside and feel it, the weight of unseen eyes. I'd spot the beige golf cart vanishing around a corner or catch the faint twitch of a curtain across the street. They wanted to intimidate us, to make us feel like prey in our own home. And it was working, but not in the way they expected. It didn't make me want to run. It made me want to fight smarter. We knew we were getting close. We had emotional testimony, fearful neighbors, plenty of oddities, but we still lacked the one thing we needed: hard proof. A smoking gun. Then, one evening, while I was buried in county financial records, cross-referencing public expense reports with the internal budget Stu had slipped us, I found something, a discrepancy. Small but telling. A $5,000 payment listed on the official records to a company called Lakeside Landscaping. But on the HOA budget that Karen presented to homeowners, that same line item was listed as general maintenance with a total of $10,000. $5,000 unaccounted for. Hidden in plain sight. Not the time to rehash settled matters, she said crisply, trying to shut me down before I even got started, but I pressed on. I understand that, I said evenly, keeping my voice calm but loud enough for everyone in Caen. The room to hear, but I came across a discrepancy that I think the board should be aware of. I stepped forward and handed out copies of the documents. On one side, the official county payment record showing $5,000 paid to Lakeside Landscaping, and on the other, the HOA's own budget listing the exact same service under general maintenance. At double the cost, $10,000. There was a hush as people started flipping through the papers, eyes darting back and forth between the columns. Karen's smile tightened into a thin, pale line. "These are out of context," she said quickly, her voice sharp now, like a blade drawn in panic. "You don't know the full story behind those numbers, but it was too late." I could feel the shift in the room. Even her most loyal board members were glancing uneasily at each other. Sarah jumped in, her tone cool and surgical. "We're not accusing anyone," she said smoothly. "We're just asking for transparency. Surely the board can explain why these figures don't match and where that extra $5,000 actually went." Karen sputtered something about administrative costs, but she couldn't provide a single receipt, invoice, or even a vague explanation. Richard just sat there, his arms crossed, glaring silently like always. That was when something remarkable happened. Stu, poor, jittery Stu, raised his hand. His voice shook as he spoke, but he said, "Yeah, I'd like to know too. I mean, we pay dues. We should know where it goes." It was the first time someone had ever publicly questioned Karen, and the ripple it sent through the room was undeniable. For a brief moment, we thought we had done it. We had cracked the facade, exposed the rot. But as Karen leaned forward, her eyes blazing, we realized this was just the beginning. "Meeting adjourned," she snapped, slamming her gavel down with unnecessary force. "Any further questions can be submitted in writing." She stood abruptly and stormed out, Richard lumbering behind her. It wasn't a victory, but it was a breach in the wall. We had struck a nerve. The real fight was only beginning. "Don, about that little lien on your property," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a razor. My stomach twisted. That lien had been resolved months ago, a clerical error from a previous utility bill that we had handled immediately, but the damage was done. Karen had just weaponized it, turning an irrelevant piece of old paperwork into a public humiliation. "Interesting, isn't it?" she continued, her smile gleaming like polished steel. "So eager to accuse others while your own house isn't exactly in order." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. She had flipped the script masterfully, shifting attention away from her own shady bookkeeping and casting a spotlight on me. I looked at Sarah, and I could see the tension in her. jaw, the silent fury simmering just beneath her composed expression. I opened my mouth to respond, to explain, but Karen cut me off with a patronizing wave of her hand. "Meeting adjourned," she declared, banging the gavel with finality. The room emptied quickly, neighbors avoiding eye contact as they shuffled out, eager to distance themselves from the spectacle. As we stood there, stunned, I realized she had played us. She had anticipated this moment, prepared for it, and struck back with a venom that made it clear we were no longer poking a bear. We were in a full-scale war with someone who knew how to wield fear and shame like weapons. Our quiet life may have been over, but a new mission had taken its place. We weren't just going to fight back, we were going to reclaim our peace, even if it meant dismantling her entire little empire to do it. The first phase of our war wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be fought in the shadows, with paper and whispers. My instinct was to go scorched earth, to hire a lawyer, file a lawsuit, call the news, make a massive public stink and burn everything down in one glorious blast. But Sarah, ever the tactician, tapped her pen on the pad and shook her head. "No," she said. "That's exactly what she expects. A lawsuit is slow. It's expensive. And it lets her play the victim. Look at the rich outsiders trying to sue our little community. No, we'll do this smart. We can't fight her on her terms, we fight her on ours," Sarah said, her voice calm but steely. And what followed was a masterclass in quiet rebellion, a plan so patient and calculated it made my first instinct to go nuclear look laughably reckless. Phase 1. Intelligence gathering. If we were going to win, we needed to know everything, every rule, every loophole, every crack in the foundation of her little empire. For the next week, we lived in the fine print. We dissected the HOA bylaws, the covenants, the county property records. I handled the digital front, combing through the county clerk's online portal for deeds, liens, permits, anything that looked off. Sarah took charge of the human front. Every evening she walked the neighborhood with Buster, our lovable golden retriever, trotting by her side. He was the perfect icebreaker. People stopped to pet him, and Sarah, all warm smiles and genuine charm, struck up easy, meandering conversations not about Karen, not directly. She asked about the neighborhood, where to get the best corn, how long folks had lived here, and in return, people talked. Oh, did they talk? That's how we started to piece together the truth behind Stu's warnings. The horror stories weren't isolated, they were everywhere. Fines for trash cans left out for minutes too long, homeowners forced to repaint their front doors over unapproved hues, a sense of constant surveillance that wrapped the whole neighborhood in a quiet chokehold. And Karen? She'd been president for 10 years, ever since Richard engineered a mass resignation of the previous board. From there, she consolidated power like a seasoned dictator, dissolving every committee, architecture, landscaping, welcome folding them all under her own authority. The entire HOA was essentially a one-woman operation. And her strongest weapon? Fear. People were afraid to challenge her because the moment they did, violations would mysteriously appear, vague and devastating, like punishment from a petty god. We met with Stu again over coffee, and he looked like a man meeting his handlers in a Cold War thriller, eyes darting, hands trembling as he stirred his cup until coffee sloshed onto the table. "You're really going to fight her?" he whispered, disbelief and dread bleeding into every word. No one's ever really fought her before." Sarah smiled gently, wrapping both hands around her mug. "We're not fighting," she said. "We're just trying to understand the rules." Stu gave a shaky, humorless laugh. "The rules?" he said. "The rules are whatever Curran decides they are that day, and you better be careful. She's got eyes and ears everywhere." Stu leaned in and told us about the HOA's finances, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was afraid the walls might be listening. He explained how the monthly dues had nearly doubled over the past 5 years, yet everything in the neighborhood was steadily falling apart. The community boat dock was rotting, potholes on the private roads were widening, and basic services were either delayed or completely neglected. "Where's all the money going?" I asked, baffled. Stu just shrugged helplessly, eyes wide with fear. "No one knows," he said. "She presents a budget once a year at the meeting, but it's just a bunch of numbers printed on paper. No receipts, no itemized details. If anyone asks for clarification, she accuses them of undermining community unity." While we were busy peeling back the layers of her power, Karen and Richard doubled down on their harassment campaign. Nothing overtly criminal, just cruel, calculated pettiness designed to grind us down. One morning, we found our rosebush, award-winning, painstakingly cared for, chopped to bits. Another day, a dead squirrel appeared on our porch like a twisted calling card. Our newspaper went missing regularly, and I could swear I heard the low whine of their golf cart more often near our driveway. It was the behavior of schoolyard bullies, trying to make life so miserable we'd pack up and disappear. But every petty act just fueled my resolve. I took photos of the vandalized roses. I emailed the sheriff's department about the squirrel, even though I knew they couldn't act on it. I started building a case file, thick with documentation, time-stamped images, logs of every encounter, every strange noise at night, every anonymous note. But the worst part wasn't the damage, it was the feeling of constantly being watched. I'd step outside and feel it, the weight of unseen eyes. I'd spot the beige golf cart vanishing around the corner or catch the faint twitch of a curtain across the street. They wanted to intimidate us, to make us feel like prey in our own home. And it was working, but not in the way they expected. It didn't make me want to run. It made me want to fight smarter. We knew we were getting close. We had emotional testimony, fearful neighbors, plenty of oddities, but we still lacked the one thing we needed: hard proof. A smoking gun. Then, one evening, while I was buried in county financial records, cross-referencing public expense reports with the internal budget Stu had slipped us, I found something. A discrepancy. Small, but telling. A $5,000 payment listed on the official records to a company called Lakeside Landscaping. But on the HOA budget that Karen presented to homeowners, that same line item was listed as general maintenance with a total of $10,000, $5,000 unaccounted for, hidden in plain sight. "Not the time to rehash settled matters," she said crisply, trying to shut me down before I even got started. But I pressed on. "I understand that," I said evenly, keeping my voice calm but loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. But I came across a discrepancy that I think the board should be aware of. I stepped forward and handed out copies of the documents on one side, The official county payment record showing $5,000 paid to Lakeside Landscaping, and on the other, the HOA's own budget listing the exact same service under general maintenance. At double the cost, $10,000. There was a hush as people started flipping through the papers, eyes darting back and forth between the columns. Karen's smile tightened into a thin, pale line. "These are out of context," she said quickly, her voice sharp now, like a blade drawn in panic. "You don't know the full story behind those numbers, but it was too late." I could feel the shift in the room. Even her most loyal board members were glancing uneasily at each other. Sarah jumped in, her tone cool and surgical. "We're not accusing anyone," she said smoothly. "We're just asking for transparency. Surely the board can explain why these figures don't match and where that extra $5,000 actually went." Karen sputtered something about administrative costs, but she couldn't provide a single receipt, invoice, or even a vague explanation. Richard just sat there, his arms crossed, glaring silently like always. That was when something remarkable happened. Stu, poor, jittery Stu, raised his hand. His voice shook as he spoke, but he said, "Yeah, I'd like to know too. I mean, we pay dues. We should know where it goes." It was the first time someone had ever publicly questioned Karen, and the ripple it sent through the room was undeniable. For a brief moment, we thought we had done it. We had cracked the facade, exposed the rot. But as Karen leaned forward, her eyes blazing, we realized this was just the beginning. "Meeting adjourned," she snapped, slamming her gavel down with unnecessary force. "Any further questions can be submitted in writing." She stood abruptly and stormed out, Richard lumbering behind her. It wasn't a victory, but it was a breach in the wall. We had struck a nerve. The real fight was only beginning. About that little lien on your property, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a razor. My stomach twisted. That lien had been resolved months ago, a clerical error from a previous utility bill that we had handled immediately, but the damage was done. Karen had just weaponized it, turning an irrelevant piece of old paperwork into a public humiliation. Interesting, isn't it? She continued, her smile gleaming like polished steel. So eager to accuse others while your own house isn't. Exactly in order. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. She had flipped the script masterfully, shifting attention away from her own shady bookkeeping and casting a spotlight on me. I looked at Sarah, and I could see the tension in her jaw, the silent fury simmering just beneath her composed expression. I opened my mouth to respond, to explain, but Karen cut me off with a patronizing wave of her hand. "Meeting adjourned," she declared, banging the gavel with finality. The room emptied quickly, neighbors avoiding eye contact as they shuffled out, eager to distance themselves from the spectacle. As we stood there, stunned, I realized she had played us. She had anticipated this moment, prepared for it, and struck back with a venom that made it clear we were no longer poking a bear. We were in a full-scale war with someone who knew how to wield fear and shame like weapons. But even as the sting of that moment settled in, I also felt something shift inside me. That cold ember of defiance, that sense of injustice that had driven us this far, now flared hotter than ever. Karen thought she had humiliated us. She thought she had won. But all she had done was show her hand and reveal how far she was willing to go to protect her power. And if she thought we'd back down now, she had no idea who she was really dealing with. Not Mr. Miller's past had been carefully buried, but now it lay exposed under the harsh light of Karen's words, words that hit with the force of a wrecking ball. "The tech company you sold," she began, her tone sharp and deliberate. "You seem to have forgotten a certain little lawsuit. Your former business partner? The one who accused you of fraud and embezzlement?" The room went still, like the breath had been sucked out of it. "Settled quietly, out of court, wasn't it? For a very large sum of money, you paid to silence him." Her voice echoed in the silence like a gavel pounding a verdict. My stomach turned. She was right. That chapter of my life was supposed to be sealed forever, a toxic end to my business career I'd never wanted revisited. I had paid my partner to disappear rather than drag the matter into a public arena. I looked at Sarah. Her face was frozen, unreadable, but her eyes betrayed a deep, stunned disbelief. Karen had just set off an explosion that would ripple through every part of our lives. "So you see," she said with cruel satisfaction, "you're in no position to be throwing stones." She stepped closer, her voice calm but laced with venom. "You, a man who covered up his own fraud, accusing me of financial mismanagement? Sit down before I decide to share even more. Maybe with your new neighbors." 1,000 eyes felt like they were drilling into me, judgmental, curious, suspicious. In one swift move, Karen had flipped the script, shattering my credibility and painting me as a hypocrite. I wasn't a concerned citizen anymore. I was a man with a shadowy past. I stumbled back to my seat, my head spinning with disbelief. How could she have known? That file was sealed, completely buried. Someone close to me had broken trust, someone with access. We had walked into that room thinking we were the hunters, prepared and righteous. But we were the prey, ambushed and bleeding. What we thought would be a simple checkmate had turned into a brutal, humiliating defeat. We had gravely underestimated our opponent. This wasn't just a petty H.O.A. conflict. It was a war, and Karen was playing for keeps. Karen wasn't just a manipulative H.O.A. president. She was a strategist with influence, resources, and a pipeline of confidential information that suggested someone close to us had turned traitor. The battle had crossed a line, becoming personal, dangerous, and unerringly calculated. As we trudged home through the suffocating silence of night, the air felt heavier than ever, like it carried the weight of our defeat. Each step from the clubhouse to our cabin was slow, painful, and haunted by one persistent, chilling thought. Who among us had betrayed us? Inside, the silence pressed even harder, thick with humiliation and disbelief. Then, breaking under the weight of rage, I muttered, "I'm going to kill her." It wasn't planned. It wasn't rational. It was the animal in me lashing out, desperate to strike back. I wanted to destroy something, anything. But before I could spiral further, Sarah turned to me, and the look on her face stopped me cold. Gone was the composed, quick-witted woman I knew. In her place stood someone colder, harder, someone transformed by fury that burned far deeper than mine. "No," she said, her voice quiet but sharp as broken glass. "That's what she wants. She wants you to lose control, to confirm the story she just sold everyone. You blow up, she wins." Sarah took a long breath, physically restraining the storm behind her eyes. But I could see it. The fire was still there, burning white-hot beneath her skin. Karen hadn't just embarrassed us, she'd drawn blood. She'd gone for the throat with surgical precision, and it worked. By unearthing my past and throwing it into the public square, she hadn't just attacked me, she'd isolated us. And the next morning, the damage was plain. The way our neighbors looked at us had changed: cold, distant, wary. We had been marked, cast out, and the war for our reputation had only just begun. People who once greeted us with smiles and waves now avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by pebbles on the path or their untied shoelaces. Any neighbors we thought might have stood by us had melted into the trees, retreating into silence and self-preservation. We were isolated, fully and painfully alone. That evening we sat together on the porch, watching the lake fade into shadows. As night fell around us, the quiet broken only by the soft lapping of water against the shore. We had reached a crossroads. Our polite, by-the-book strategy had failed in spectacular fashion. We had tried to play chess with someone who preferred to flip the board and throw punches. "We need a new approach," I said finally, eyes fixed on the black water. "She's not playing fair. She's got eyes on us, access to sealed records. This isn't about HOA rules anymore. It's a street fight." Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her voice, when it came, was clipped and cautious. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I hesitated, knowing what I was about to say could test everything between us, our values, our trust, even our marriage. "I'm saying we stop playing defense," I replied quietly. "We stop trying to win her game. We start playing ours. I've got a tech background. You've got yours. Instead of chasing HOA infractions, we start digging for real dirt crimes. Fraud, things the police or even federal agencies would care about." Sarah didn't respond. I could almost see the war raging inside her, between the principled woman who believed in rules and the one standing on the edge of something darker. She had always seen the world in order, in systems. "What you're talking about," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper, "is stepping onto a very thin line. It could spiral, it could get ugly, illegal." I turned to her, eyes burning with frustration. "It's already ugly. She's the one who crossed the line. She used sealed legal documents to smear me in public. She's targeting us, harassing us. How long do we let her beat us down before we fight back?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice, letting the weight of the moment hang in the air. "Think about it, Sarah. Not about the rules, but about justice, real justice." "Think about it, Sarah," I said, my voice steady but urgent. "You know how to run surveillance, how to find the cracks in a system. I know how to handle the tech. Together, we're a two-person army. We can build a case against Karen so airtight, so damning, she won't be able to wriggle out of it with charm or lies." But beneath the adrenaline and resolve, a deeper question clawed at me. Were we really chasing justice or just vengeance dressed up in a noble disguise? Were we trying to clean up a corrupt system or just burn down the woman who humiliated us? Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Maybe, for the first time in my life, I was comfortable living in that gray space. I watched Sarah wrestle with it, this woman who had spent years running from the blurred edges of morality, trying to live in clear black and white. But tonight, the law she believed in had failed her. Doing things the right way had led only to betrayal, humiliation, and isolation. And now I was asking her to return to a world of shadows she had deliberately left behind. She looked at me with searching eyes, weighing trust, fear, and something sharper resolve. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we do it my way. No mistakes, no heat-of-the-moment decisions. We are methodical. We are patient. Every single move is calculated." Her voice hardened, the edge of a steel blade sharpening in the dark. "We gather evidence of an actual crime, and we deliver it to the proper authorities. We become the hand of justice, not the executioners." Relief swept over me like a tide. I hadn't lost her. We were aligned, united. "Your way," I agreed. Slow, precise, uncheckable. She stood, walking to the edge of the porch, eyes locked on the faint glow of light in Karen's upstairs window. "She wanted a war," Sarah said, her voice cold and focused. "She has no idea what war with us really looks like." And just like that, the moral debate was over. The line had been crossed. We weren't victims anymore. We were hunters, ready to unleash every ounce of skill, anger, and intelligence we possessed. The rules had changed. The battlefield had shifted, and from here on out, we would write our own playbook, one calculated move at a time. To shadow a routine service for research purposes, just to observe, no interference, no hassle. I offered him one of the rare lures as a thank you gesture, and to my relief, he agreed without hesitation. Our new war didn't begin with a dramatic confrontation. It started with a soft, deliberate click, the mechanical whisper of a hidden camera lens locking into place. We had crossed the moral Rubicon, and there was no going back. Sarah's strategy was precise and merciless in its elegance. "Her greed and her ego are her weaknesses," she said, pacing the living room like a field commander before battle. "She thinks she's invincible. We're going to use that arrogance against her." The plan was simple in concept but risky in execution. Bait Karen into corruption and catch her red-handed. Our working theory was that she'd been siphoning H.O.A. funds through shady contractor kickbacks, especially around the questionable lakeside landscaping. So we set out to tempt her with an irresistible opportunity. I built an entirely fictional company from the ground up, Mountain Ridge Renovations. In 2 intense days, I spun it into existence, designing a slick website, setting up a polished email address, printing business cards, and routing calls to a burner phone. On paper, it looked completely legitimate. Then came the bait, the clubhouse. Renovation. It was a known eyesore, a perfect excuse for a big job, and likely an easy place for her to push through inflated contractor invoices. But the heart of the operation was Sarah's domain surveillance. "We need to see and hear everything," she said, especially inside the office where she holds private meetings. Getting cameras inside, however, was the hard part. We couldn't exactly pick the lock. That's when I remembered something Stu, our jittery, overly chatty neighbor, had once mentioned. The clubhouse had monthly pest control visits, always on the first Tuesday. I dug up an old invoice Stu had shown me and found the company name. A bit of online sleuthing revealed the owner, and even better, his obsession with a rare type of fishing lure. The next day, I accidentally ran into him at the local tackle shop, casually dropped a mention of owning some of those elusive lures, and by the end of our friendly chat, I had his private number. The following day, I made my move, told him Sarah and I were considering launching a security consulting startup. and wanted to shadow a regular service call just to get a feel for routine building access. I offered him one of the lures as thanks, and just like that, our plan was in motion. The first piece of the trap was set, and Karen didn't even know the snare was tightening. This going to cost us? She asked, already bored, already calculating. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly suspect, was that every word she was about to say, every glance, every implication, was being recorded in crystal clear detail. The plan had gone off smoother than we ever expected. The day before, I had offered the pest control guy $500 cash to let my trainee Sarah, wearing a generic security company polo and a fake ID. I whipped up Tag along for 10 minutes, under the pretense of testing new bug detection gear. He hesitated, but between the cash and the rare fishing lures I'd gifted him, his resistance melted. The next morning, Sarah walked into the clubhouse with him, calm and composed, and while he sprayed the hallways, she slipped into Karen's office. She had just 7 minutes, barely enough time, but she used every second with surgical precision. A pin-sized camera was installed inside the smoke detector. A directional mic was hidden in a wall outlet, and a backup recorder was tucked beneath the conference table. All of it state-of-the-art, all purchased anonymously with prepaid gift cards and shipped to a rented P.O. box in another town. We were ghosts, no fingerprints, no paper trail. With the surveillance in place, it was time to bait the hook. Using a calm, professional tone, I called the H.O.A. office as Mark Peterson of Mountain Ridge Renovations. When Karen picked up, I laid on the charm, offering a free, no obligation estimate to overhaul the dilapidated clubhouse bathrooms. Job most real contractors wouldn't touch without charging a fortune. But predictably, her greed got the better of her. A free quote was too tempting to ignore. She agreed to meet the next morning. The day of the meeting, my pulse pounded with adrenaline. Sarah was stationed at home, eyes locked on the live video feed, headphones plugged in to catch every word. I wore a shirt with a tiny microphone embedded in the top button, transmitting everything back to her in real time. This had to go exactly right. When I stepped into the office, Karen was seated, her expression dismissive, and Richard stood in the corner like a statue. "Mr. Johnson," she said flatly. "It's Mark," I corrected. "Mark Peterson." She waved her hand like I was an insect. "Whatever. Let's make this quick. What's this going to cost us?" And just like that, the first domino teetered. The trap wasn't just set, it was already starting to close. "What's your proposal?" Karen asked, arms crossed, impatience oozing from every syllable. I walked her through my fabricated renovation plans, pointing out the rotting floorboards, corroded pipes, and outdated tile like I'd been in the business for years. I pitched the job $30,000, just slightly higher than average. "It's a big project," I said confidently. "But we can handle it," she scoffed. 30 grand, that's absurd. We don't have that kind of money in the budget." And there it was, the moment we'd been building toward. I lowered my voice and leaned in slightly, adopting the tone of a man offering something under the table. "That's the official quote," I said, "the one you show the board. But that doesn't have to be what actually gets paid." Her eyes flickered with interest, a glint of greed sparking to life. "What exactly are you suggesting?" She whispered, her posture shifting subtly. I delivered the bait slowly, each word calculated. You approve the contract for $30,000. I do the work for, say, $20,000. And the remaining 10, well, we call that a consulting fee. Just a little something for you, for making sure things go smoothly. Paid in cash, of course. Richard, the silent gargoyle in the corner, shifted his stance, a slimy grin creeping across his face. Karen leaned back in her chair, that familiar smug expression settling in. She thought she had just finessed a rookie contractor into a profitable side deal. She had no clue she was already deep inside a trap. "I think," she said with a smirk, "we can do business, Mark." And just like that, the jaws snapped shut. Later that night, Sarah was reviewing the footage frame by frame, analyzing every word, every gesture. Then she suddenly froze, her eyes locked on the screen. "Oh no," she whispered. I rushed over. She pointed at the video, zooming in on the reflection in the glass of a picture frame hanging on the wall. For just a split second, barely noticeable, you could see the door opening, and someone standing in the hallway, watching, listening. It was neighbor Stu, the coffee-bringing, nervous-talking, always concerned Stu. My first reaction was volcanic. "That snake," I growled, slamming my fist on the desk. "He's been playing us the whole time, pretending to be scared of Karen, pretending to help us. It was all an act." But Sarah was already beyond the outrage, her mind shifting into cold, precise calculation. The discovery wasn't just a betrayal, it was a new variable in the war we thought we were finally beginning to win. "This is bad. Alex, this is very bad," Sarah said, her voice low but charged with urgency. "He heard everything he knows about the fake company, the surveillance, the plan. He's going to Corinne. He's going to tell her everything." In an instant, our perfect trap, our meticulously crafted sting operation, had turned into a live wire threatening to ignite in our faces. Karen would find the cameras, erase the footage, and then come after us, not just to ruin our lives, but to get us arrested. Illegal surveillance, entrapment, she'd bury us under the weight of the very system she was corrupting. My pulse thundered. In my ears, "What do we do?" I asked, panic creeping in. "Do we pull the plug?" "Rip out the cameras and pretend none of this ever happened." Sarah didn't answer right away. She just stared at the frozen image of Stu's face reflected in the frame, his eyes wide, calculating, caught in the act of betrayal. Finally, she turned to me, her voice like ice over steel. "No, we don't abort. We accelerate." "Accelerate?" I echoed, struggling to keep pace. "Sarah, he's the informant. He's the one who told her about my sealed case. He knows everything. Our whole plan." "Exactly," she said, eyes narrowing with purpose. "He knows our old plan. He thinks we're amateurs trying to catch Karen breaking HOA rules. But he doesn't know who he's really dealing with." Her face hardened into something cold, fierce, calculating. "Stu just crossed a line. He's no longer just a pawn. He's an accomplice. He overheard a plan that, if he thought was criminal, he should have taken to the authorities. But he didn't. He's loyal to Karen. That makes him part of the conspiracy now." I could practically see the gears in her mind turning, faster than I could follow. "We have to assume he's already told her," she continued. "So what's Karen's move? She feel like she's won. She think we're panicking. She be ready at the next HOA meeting, probably expecting us to try something, maybe even play the recording. She have her lawyer there. She come in cocky, untouchable, expecting to see us humiliated. Her voice dropped to a razor-sharp whisper. Good. Let her think that. Let her believe she's outplayed us. Because when someone thinks they've won, they stop watching their back. And that's when we strike. Betrayal had forced us to look beyond our narrow plan, beyond the HOA drama, and straight into the heart of something much darker and more corrupt. She accused us of wiretapping, I said, the weight of it sinking in. She had tried to humiliate us again, but this time with legal firepower. So we can't use the recording, I added, already feeling the cold fingers of defeat tightening around my gut. But Sarah's expression was unwavering. Oh, we're going to use it, she said, a grim smile creeping across her face. Just not in the way she expects. We're not going to play our hand at the HOA meeting. We're going to change the game entirely. The next 48 hours were a wind. Our cozy little cabin transformed into a full-fledged war room, glowing, with screens and buzzing with quiet tension. Sarah became someone else entirely calm, focused, and relentless. She made one phone call, short and cryptic. She dialed a number from memory, one she clearly hadn't used in years. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't need to. All I heard was her voice, low and steady. John, it's me. I need a favor. A big one. I'm calling in my chit. That's when things shifted into overdrive. Within hours, a secure email landed in her inbox containing a name and a number. She made a second call, this one longer, more detailed. I listened, stunned, as she introduced herself as Agent Miller, a name I'd never heard her use. I have a situation involving wire fraud, conspiracy, and extortion, she said, with a possible connection to a public official. Yes, the activity crosses state lines. My mouth went dry. This wasn't about H.O.A. drama anymore. We were standing on the edge of something massive. And then the truth started unraveling like a tangled web snapping loose. Karen's brother-in-law, the owner of Lakeside Landscaping, wasn't just padding her pockets. His company had been awarded multiple no-bid contracts by the city. Every single one had been pushed through by a city councilman. That councilman, Karen and Richard's cousin. This wasn't a one-off grift, it was a deeply entrenched network of corruption. The H.O.A. was just their training ground, their personal piggy bank. The $10,000 I had offered, that wasn't greed. That was protocol, routine, expected, and our little recording. It wasn't just evidence of H.O.A. mismanagement. It was now classified as evidence in a federal investigation. Stu's betrayal, as personal and painful as it was, had inadvertently forced us to widen our lens. In doing so, he hadn't derailed our plan, he'd accelerated it into something far bigger. Something with teeth. Something with the power to finally bring the whole rotten empire crashing down. Stu's cowardice had forced our hand, pushing us to raise the stakes far beyond what we'd originally imagined. He thought he was shielding Karen, protecting her empire from collapse, but in reality, he had handed us the perfect weapon. We weren't planning a neighborhood skirmish anymore. We were orchestrating a takedown. The day before the annual H.O.A. meeting, our cabin buzzed with focused intensity. As we turned it into our final prep zone, I compiled everything, every shred of evidence, onto a single flash drive, The audio and video from the clubhouse sting, the financial inconsistencies we'd uncovered, the municipal contract records Sarah's contact had provided, and a meticulously detailed timeline of Karen's harassment, right down to photos of our withered roses. This wasn't a petty HOA dispute anymore. This was a federal case dressed in suburban clothes. Stu's betrayal had lit a fire we hadn't realized we were capable of feeding. This was no longer about fences or flower beds. This was about corruption, intimidation, and abuse of power woven deep into our city's infrastructure. And as we suited up for the final confrontation, I knew Karen was preparing for a battle. What she didn't realize was that we were bringing a nuclear strike. The annual HOA meeting was always Karen's coronation ceremony, her well-rehearsed moment to bask in the spotlight, surrounded by her loyalists and flanked by Richard like some cold-blooded sentinel. The community clubhouse was packed, buzzing with the uneasy energy of rumors and curiosity. Whispers had been swirling for weeks, and people showed up hoping to witness fireworks. They smelled blood, but they didn't yet know whose. We slipped in quietly and sat at the back, every eye following us like a spotlight. Stu sat near the front, his face smug and satisfied. He gave us a small, knowing nod, a condescending little smirk that screamed, "I've already won." He thought we were cornered, outplayed. He had no idea the level of game we were playing now. At the head table, Karen looked untouchable, glowing with smug authority. Richard hovered beside her like an obedient enforcer. She exuded confidence, certain we wouldn't dare play the recording. Thanks to Stu, she was expecting a cheap, clumsy move, a public accusation she could knock down with legal threats and a well-rehearsed speech. Maybe she even had her lawyer waiting by the phone. The meeting began, as always, with Karen's long-winded sermon of self-praise. She gushed about her leadership, the board's financial responsibility, the importance of community standards. It was polished. It was hollow. It was hypocrisy wearing pearls. My blood started to boil, my fists tightening under the table. But before I could act, Sarah reached over and placed a calming hand on my arm, a quiet reminder that we weren't here for revenge. We were here to deliver justice, and our timing had to be perfect. "Patience," she whispered coldly. "Let her build her own gallows." As the meeting dragged on, we finally reached the section for homeowner concerns. She fixed her gaze on us, her tone oozing with insincere sweetness. "Does anyone," she asked with a smirk, "have any new business they'd like to bring before the board?" This was the moment we had been waiting for. I stood up slowly, gripping a laptop, and felt the weight of every eye in the room turn toward me. Stu was practically vibrating with excitement, grinning wide, while Karen leaned back in her chair, wearing a sharp, predatory smile, clearly prepared for a confrontation. "Yes, Karen, I do," I said clearly, my voice breaking through the thick silence. "I've prepared a brief presentation on the financial integrity and ethical leadership of our community." She let out a derisive laugh. "Oh, this again, Mr. Miller? We've been over this. Your personal vendettas don't belong here." "It's not a vendetta," I replied as I connected my laptop to the projector. "It's documented evidence." The first slide lit up behind her, the budget sheet she had presented earlier, listing a $10,000 expense for general maintenance. Next to it, I displayed the county's official record showing a payment of only $5,000. "As I've mentioned before," I said firmly, there's a $5,000 gap here. You called it creative accounting, but we were curious, so we looked deeper. Karen opened her mouth to interrupt, but I pressed on, my voice now gaining strength and clarity. We wanted to know if this was a one-off, or part of a pattern. What we found was eye-opening. Click. The next slide revealed 5 years of financial records, all showing similar inconsistencies between budgeted amounts and actual payments made to select companies. In total, over $150,000 was completely unaccounted for. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd, people sitting up straighter, glancing at Karen with growing suspicion. "This is outrageous," Richard shouted, standing abruptly. "You have no real proof." "Oh, but I do, Richard," I responded, calm and composed. "We were so inspired by your financial acrobatics, we decided to follow the money ourselves." Click, and just like that, the screen went black. I hit the play button, and instantly, the hidden camera footage flickered to life on the big screen, the audio booming through the clubhouse speakers with unsettling clarity. The entire room sat in stunned silence as the video showed Mark from Mountain Ridge Renovations me handing Karen a $10,000 cash kickback, caught red-handed. Her voice rang out clear as day, accepting the bribe without hesitation, followed by Richard's slimy chuckle that sent a visible chill through the crowd. The greed on their faces was undeniable. Gasps rippled through the room like shockwaves. People pointed, shouted, some even stood up in disbelief. Stu, who had been practically vibrating with arrogance just moments ago, looked like he'd seen a ghost, his face pale, his stomach visibly churning. Karen sat frozen, disbelief and horror etched into every inch of her expression. The self-proclaimed queen had just been publicly dethroned, humiliated before the very people she ruled over. "This is illegal," she shrieked suddenly, her voice cracking as panic took hold. "You recorded me without my consent. This is entrapment. I'll have you arrested." But before she could spiral further, a calm and commanding voice echoed from the back of the room. "No, Karen. You won't." The crowd instinctively parted like the Red Sea as 2 men and a woman in sharp, dark suits strode forward. The woman held up a badge. "FBI," she announced clearly. "Karen and Richard Thompson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and extortion." Just then, 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies entered through the main doors, heading straight for the head table. As the cuffs clicked around Karen's wrists, she locked eyes with Sarah's eyes full of realization, fear, and bitter understanding. This hadn't been a scuffle with a disgruntled homeowner. This wasn't about ego or petty revenge. She had underestimated a woman who knew exactly how to dismantle lives methodically, completely, and who had powerful allies ready to strike. One of the agents turned to Stu, who was awkwardly trying to slink away toward the exit. "And you, sir," she said, pointing directly at him. "We need to speak with you as well regarding conspiracy and obstruction of justice." The last glimpse I had of Karen, she was being escorted out in handcuffs, her face streaked with tears and twisted in rage as the empire she had so carefully built collapsed into dust behind her. The room didn't erupt into applause, it simply sat in heavy, almost sacred silence. The nightmare was over. We had won. We hadn't just punched back. We had scorched the earth and burned her entire kingdom to ash. 6 months later, I sat on the back deck of the home Karen once vowed we'd never be allowed to build. The air was crisp, the lake still and serene, and Buster lay dozing at my feet, paws twitching in a dream chase after imaginary squirrels. Sarah stepped out with 2 glasses of iced tea, settling beside me in peaceful silence. No words were needed. The quiet said it all. We had earned this calm. Karen and Richard ended up taking a plea deal, losing everything: their home, their wealth, and their freedom. A sweeping federal audit followed, rolling through the local government like a wrecking ball, toppling a city councilman and decimating half the HOA, us corrupt leadership. Even Stu, once so smug, turned informant to save himself, sold his house in disgrace, and disappeared like smoke in the wind. The HOA was rebuilt from the ground up, and the very first order of business was to shred Karen's infamous 82-page rulebook. The reign of beige had finally, gloriously ended. We got our fence, of course, but it wasn't the fence or the deck, or even the dramatic downfall that lingered with me. It was what Sarah said the moment the sheriff handed Karen her warrant. "Next time, Karen, bring your own lawyer." She didn't say it with glee or vengeance. She said it with cold precision, sharp and exact, like a scalpel slicing clean through. That, right there, was the difference between revenge and justice. And, in the end, we chose justice.